Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial we're going to look at the event object class in Java Swing, and we're also going to take a look at getting the text from text fields in Swing, and form handling in general. So in the last tutorial I created this little application, and at the moment actually these buttons still work, but this form doesn't do anything, and I want to make this form work. And in future tutorials we're going to look at the model part of the model view controller architecture, which we're going to get into, but and that part handles data, storing data and dealing with data in your application. But for the moment I just want to fix this so that if you fill something in here and you click OK, then it adds the text to this panel on the right here. So I need to transmit data basically from this form to this panel control on the right. But I don't want to send the data there directly. To keep the communication streamlined and to keep it from getting tangled in my application, I want all communication to be routed through this main frame here, which is acting as my controller. The mainframe creates all the main components, my toolbar, text panel and form panel, and I want my the information from my form to reach mainframe, and then mainframe decides what to do with it, processes it in any way it wants to, and then in this case it's going to tell the text panel to display it. And that's one of the keys to keeping your application from turning into a rat's nest. So to do that I need to respond to clicks on this button, and beginners often make the mistake of trying to detect when a user's entering text here, and most of the time you don't need to do that, because you only want to submit your form information when the button is clicked. So it's the button that you have to listen to, and when the button's clicked we're going to get the text from these text fields and do something with it. So let's first go into the form panel, and I'm going to add a listener, an action listener, to the OK button. So I'll say OK btn.add action listener, and I could make my form class, my form panel class, implement action listener and pass in this here, but what I'm going to do instead is use an anonymous class. I'll just put the semicolon in there. I'm going to say new action listener, which is the interface name, round brackets and open a curly parentheses, hit return. Eclipse puts the closing parentheses in, parenthesis I should say, and if I click on this here I can, if I've got the import there already, which I have, then I can add unimplemented methods here, and that works the same in NetBeans I think, and probably in IntelliJ IDEA if you're using that IDE. And then it adds this public void action perform method, which receives a action event notice. Now I'll get rid of these lines that I don't really need. By the way, this is an attribute that ensures, so it's an annotation that ensures that this really is an override, but I'm going to trust that it is the correct override. Just delete that. And now, so this is going to be called whenever the button's clicked, and when the button's clicked I can say string name equals name field dot get text, and string occupation equals occupation field dot get text, like this. It's pretty simple, and I'm just referring here, name field of course are an occupation field are kind of private instance variables in my containing class, the form panel, which contains the form. Now at this point I somehow need to pass this information to my main frame, and I'm not going to try to call mainframe directly. I'm going to do what I've done before and raise an event which the mainframe is going to listen to. Now I'm going to introduce a new little kind of twist here, because I want to kind of move towards showing you how Swing handles events natively. So we see that Swing's got this mechanism where you say things like add action listener, and then your action listener, your class which implements the action listener interface in this case, has a method called action performed, which receives an action event, and the action event is used to pass information from the control that raises the event, which is the button in this case, to the listening class, which is this anonymous class here in this case. So I'm going to actually define an event, and my event is going to be used to temporarily store name and occupation, and also information I'm going to add to my form later on. And it's going to transmit, it's going to be used to take that information up to the main frame, which is my controller class, because the main frame creates the toolbar, text panel and form panel, and it decides what to do with the information that they generate, and it hooks them all together. So I'll start here by creating a new class, and I'm going to call it form event. So this is a kind of event class, and I don't have to, but I'm going to make it extend event object, which is a standard Java class. And if I add the import there, that's actually this event object is the class which all the kind of swing events, like for example action event, derive from. If I just extend this event object, it's going to help us kind of move towards more like the Swing native architecture later on, although this native kind of Swing event handling is kind of a bit overkill for most purposes, which is why I haven't kind of immediately shown you how it works. So I've got a form event object which extends event object, and I'm going to start by, well, I'll add the import there. Import event object, and I'm going to add a constructor here, because event object has a constructor which accepts an object which is the source of the event, and the source means the object that raises the event, and in this case the source is going to be the form panel. For example, within the form panel I listen to a button, a J button, and the source in that case is going to be the button itself. So this action event will have a source which will be the actual button that raises the event. So now once I've done that, so I've just extended the event object, added a constructor that accepts the source of the event, and this is really simple. I'm just going to add a couple of fields now, so private string name and private string occupation, because I just want this class to store that information temporarily. It's just going to take that information and relay it to my main frame. And let's add getters and setters for that. So I'll use an Eclipse shortcut. I'll right click and go to source and generate getters and setters, and every good IDE has this facility, of course, and click OK, and there we go, we've got my getters and setters, get occupation, set occupation, and so on. And I will let's also alter the constructor a bit here, because I might want to just bung in the name and occupation here. Actually, I'm not really sure about that. Let's just have another constructor so I can use it if I want to. So let's say here string name, string occupation, and this dot name equals name, and this dot occupation equals occupation. And if you've been programming Java for any length of time, this kind of pattern will be burned into your brain by now, where you pass in some parameters and set the instance variable parameters to the arguments that are passed in. Okay, so now I've got a event object that can store that information temporarily, and back in my form panel, when the button is clicked, I can say, I could create one of those events. So I could say form event, event, I'll just call it ev actually, equals new form event. And I can pass in the source, which is this, and the name, and the occupation. And now the question is, how am I going to get that back to my main frame? And I want the main frame to kind of have some stuff that looks like this in it. If I go to the main frame, you see that I've got I already set a listener on the toolbar, and I want the main frame to do the same kind of thing with the form panel. So I can say form panel dot, and I want something that looks like this, set form listener, and that method is not implemented yet, but this is what it's going to look like when it's finished. And in there I want to be able to say something like new form listener, which again doesn't exist yet, and the form listener interface, which I'm going to create, should have a method that's something like public void form event, form event occurred, let's say, and the form event occurred method should accept a form event, which I'll just call E, and then it should do something with it. In fact, what it should do is it should get the string name equals e dot get name, because form event is just this event class that I've just created here, which has the get name and the set name and all that kind of stuff. And string occupation equals e dot get occupation like this. And once it's got them, it can tell the text panel what to do. It can say text panel dot append. I think the text panel has an append text method, so I can say append text and something like name, and let's add in a plus and some punctuation, and then occupation and plus and maybe a \n, a new line. Now if you're kind of losing the thread a bit at this point, don't worry too much. I'd say, like, take a look at the example we went through earlier with the toolbar, because this is very similar. It's just that I've introduced this event object, this form event thing, and try typing it out for yourself, because once you've typed this out once or twice, I think you will get the hang of it. And the main points here are that I created this form event object which can store the name and occupation. Actually, that should be called occupation. I've got a spelling mistake there. Let's just fix that. So the form event stores the name and the occupation. There we go. And it derives from the swing event object class, and that has a constructor that accepts the source of the event, and the source of the event is whichever component fired the event, which is going to be my form panel in this case. And the next step is, like, if you get used to adding action listeners to buttons, like here I've added an action listener to this OK button, you can then do the same thing with your own controls. So instead of action listener, I've just made up names here. I've said set form listener instead of add action listener, and instead of action listener I've got form listener here. Instead of action performed I've got form event occurred. So I'm just making these up, and now I'm going to implement the relevant stuff to make that work. And the way I'll do that is, so I've got my form event, but I need to create the form listener interface. So let's just, have I still got an error in here? Yeah, I've just got one A missing there. Okay, so I'm going to go right click here, and I'm going to go to new interface form listener, and I want my form listener interface to have a method called form event occurred. So that's all I want to have in it, which accepts a form event. So I'm copying that and I'll just paste it in here. And just to make this more like the kind of native Swing way of doing this, I can also make it implement the event listener. Sorry, not implement, but extend the event listener class, which is Java util event listener. And that's the basis for all the listeners in Swing, like the action listener, for example. And now I just need to create this set form listener method in the form panel. So if I go to my form panel, then I can say here, let's have a private variable, private form listener. And I want a method called set form listener. So let's go down here, let's get rid of those blank lines and say public void set form listener, and that accepts a form listener. In other words, any class that implements a form listener interface. So I'll call that listener, and I can just set the this.form listener equal to the listener. And then the final step here is at this point here, so in my action listener on the button, I've created a form event that has the relevant information in it. And now I just have to say that if the form listener, which I added as an instance variable, is not equal to null, then I can call the one method that all form listeners have, which is the form event occurred. I can say here in my form panel. So I can say form listener, if it's not equal to null, dot form event occurred, and pass in the event there. And the whole kind of the point of this is that form panel doesn't contain any references to mainframe, but nevertheless mainframe has set itself, or it's set actually an anonymous class as the form listener using this method. So it used the set form listener, and that anonymous class here that implements the form listener interface can receive the form event occurred. It has a method that will be called by the form panel when a form event occurs. So the form panel calls that form event occurred method. So this here is calling this method here, and then this is within mainframe, and then mainframe tells the text panel what to do. So if I run that and I fill in something here like let's try it with nothing in for the moment, so I just get the colon being output. And you might want to put some validation on this form, of course. So let's fill in here John software trainer, click OK, and every time I click the button it fills that in. So let's have another one, Bob lion tamer. There you go. So this, I appreciate that this is pretty complex and a lot of people are puzzled by this, but as I say, don't write your brains over it, just type it out, just look at the example I've given you and try to implement the same thing. And if you can spend that time doing it, you know, just like an hour or two doing that, it will really help you get your head around it, and understanding this stuff will massively help you create nicely structured Swing applications. And alternatively, if you just want to bang out Swing applications that just work, then yeah, you could pass in a reference to the mainframe directly into your form panel, or even passing a reference to the you could pass a reference to the text area panel here to the form panel here. But if you do that a lot, and if your ambition is to create complex Swing applications, then that will get unmanageably complex pretty quickly. So if you want to create quite complex Swing applications, it's really worth just spending a little bit of time looking at this code and getting used to it. Okay, so that's more than enough for this tutorial, and you'll be pleased to know that after this we've looked at kind of Swing events, and we've looked at grid bag layout, and after these two immensely complicated things, it's almost plain sailing from here on in. So in the next tutorial we're going to look at something nice and simple, and we're going to look at the JList control. So join me again then, and until next time, happy coding.